Shehu Amina. She is the founder and CEO of Fiduciary Services Limited. Mercy is a visionary executive with digital and agile mindsets, along with the strong innovation and data analysis capabilities. She has over 15 years of rich capital market experience, across corporate ledger services, corporate governance, regulatory compliance, business development, and client management. She has an advanced diploma in international trust management as well as an Islamic finance qualification from the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment, that's CISI UK. So following this introduction, we can all tell that each speaker brings a unique perspective on estate planning for techpreneurs and strategies. Basically, these strategies are important for us to follow and manage the tangible assets, and extremely important as we're currently in a digital age where techpreneurs are investing in digital assets. So it's extremely important that we're all aware of this, and as entrepreneurs, you come up with the right strategies to go about it. So, but before we start, there are some ground rules for this session. So just for those that have just come in, so it's important that you display your name for ease of identification. This basically just helps the facilitators and other participants address you properly. Please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking, just to minimize the background noise and disruptions. Also stay focused, please. Avoid multitasking. Let's take this very seriously, please. More like an in-person meeting. So if you have any questions or comments, please use the chat box. We would read out the question at the end of the speaker session. There will be a time for question and answer. And to avoid talking over others, please just use the raise hand feature to request, if you want to speak. Lastly, listen actively and allow others speak. Let's keep our comments constructive and professional. So thank you for being with us, and we will get right to the business of the day now. So I don't know, I'll be starting with Inemisit. I don't know if she's here. Yeah, okay, yeah. So, and for me, we're in a fast scaling startup environment, right? There's a lot of business coming up, tech businesses coming up, startups. And, over the past few years, even in businesses, the focus has been on, capital raising, getting people on board, trying to raise funds. And, so in recent times, most people have not really focused on, estate planning. So how do you convince a tech founder to view estate planning, from day one?
Okay, hi. Thank you very much, Bayomi. It's very exciting to be here. Thank you so much to the host and team for this spectacular topic. I think that, first of all, the major challenge we're going to be dealing with when you're dealing with startup founders will be their youth because of the demographic that we are dealing with. So young people never really think about the future. So I'm not quite would put it as death. When people think about estate planning, they're thinking about, well, that's not going to happen now in this climate. I think God forbid, But apart from death, because they are young, there's a lot of adrenaline, energy, a today focused kind of viewpoint or perspective to life. So that's one thing you need to be able to realize. One major thing, but I would say to a startup founder that look, just like that your investors are not investing an idea is a dime a dozen. As the major driver of the project, they see your ability, your willingness, your expertise, network as what is scalable. So you're not just selling the idea, you're not selling the product, you're not selling your ROIs, you're selling you. So if you're selling, you're the major asset. So your name, your brand, your future is a major asset. Some of the startup founders may not have been married yet, they don't have children yet, but I think there are some triggers in life that make you want to think about tomorrow. I mean, young person may want to drive down with your hood down, your car, and you're just driving it. But once you have a wife, thinking, once you have a child or you have a dependent, or maybe your age parents now become, they're slowing down in life, you start thinking to yourself, you know what, I need to be present, I need to be more around. So that triggers some sort of future thinking perspective. So what I would say is while you're dealing with your cap tables, you're dealing with making sure you have a good brand for people who want to invest in you. You're not just estate planning is not about a conversation about it's a conversation about life. Is a growth architecture tool. It's something that you're going to also mark to say, look, we have a succession arrangement that is ongoing. This is the founders I have on board. If one person passes, this is what the other person is supposed to do. If both pass at the same time, this is what the next triggers are. So it helps investors to trust you, that you're not just a fluke, that you're not just a one-hit wonder, be here today and then gone tomorrow. So you are actually thinking about the future. So that's what I would say. While you're insuring your servers, you're protecting your codes, you should also think about how to assure your investors that you're also insured, not against death, but as against any to ensure the continuity of business. Thank you.
Thank you, Inem, and I must agree with you, right? One of the most valuable assets of any business is the founders, those that actually the people, right? So as a business owner, right, anybody investing in your business would be investing basically in you. So that's why businesses now, business leaders now globally are beginning to create a brand around themselves. So investors are now investing in businesses just beyond the product, the person, those behind it. And that's why you see a lot of business owners coming out online now, building that brand. So extremely important in creating that exit plan, right from the go-get, right? So that you are able to secure that, asset, which is critical, like you've rightly said. So thank you for that, Inem. So I'll be going over to Razak now, right? So basically we've talked about how it is important to get that exit plan from the get-go, and usually for most startups, right, one of the challenge would be that how can I actually keep control, right, in an estate plan, especially when you have other investors coming in after several funding rounds, so how can a tech founder keep control of their investment startup in an estate plan? So Razak, can you help us with that?
Yeah, thank you, Abayomi. It's my pleasure being here. Quite a unique topic, I must say. It's not the kind of topic you see on everyday webinar. So this is quite unique and interesting. Okay, I think the first place to start from will be the whole idea of startups or companies generally, beyond startups. Surely, if you're looking at scaling, if you're looking at building something amazing, something that can have generational impact, it won't exist beyond your own generation. There is potential to have external capital, because external capital is like a fuel to supercharge the growth of the company that you're building. Of course, we've seen instances where companies get built without external capital, but on the average, you usually have external capital. And external capital comes with dilution, so your ownership will have to be diluted. So I'll speak on two types of dilution, or two types of interest, really, after dilution happens. There is the economic interest, which typically just focuses on the benefit that comes from the ownership of the entities, right? Could be from dividend cash flows that come in from the entity. And then there is the voting interest, which typically determines the level of control that you have in that entity. So there are instances where you can have very small economic interest in an entity, but your voting interest can be significantly high. And we've seen that instance played out in some companies in the world. And we've also seen instances of that being allowed by CAMA 2020 in Nigeria, even though it's not explicitly stated. but there's some flexibility incorporated into CAMA 2020 that can enable you structure ownership of the company along economic interest and voting interest. So one key strategy that founders use globally now is the concept of dual class shares, such that you have two types of shares, two types of classes of shares in the company. And the first share type can be what external investors will have, while the second type is what you have. And the two shares are primarily divided along the line of economic interest and voting interest. So the whole idea is that as you bring in more investors into the company, your economic interest can be diluted, right? But you still want to retain some level of control when it comes to some strategic decisions about the company. And that's where the voting interest comes from. So you might be holding just 10% of the shares of the company, but you might end up controlling 90% of the decision-making process. And we've seen companies like Google, Meta, who employ this. But I need to qualify this. It's not something that you see on everyday startup structure or company structure, to be honest, because investors who are bringing in money are also very considerate. They're also very concerned about your objective of doing that. So before you can bring out that kind of structure, suggest that kind of structure, it must be that you're bringing significant value to the table that is irresistible to the investment community, such that they are willing to overlook it while giving you money to do that. But if it's just a random idea and then you want to start having significant control and economic control on the table from day one, I doubt most investors will be interested in that. So Meta was able to do that because it was a unique value proposition at that point. So the founder had significant negotiation power on the table because of the unique idea. Google was also able to do that. So it's not something you see on everyday basis. So that's the first one. The second one is about building founders' trust, or just a holding company that holds the ownership of the company on behalf of the founder in a trust. And the whole idea of that is to ensure that even when the founder is no longer there, the trust is there to take the responsibility of making decisions, the responsibility of voting, the responsibility of critical decision making outside the founder's presence. So that's the second strategy. Then there is another part which is generally known as golden shares. And these golden shares might just be, it's very similar to the, dual class shares type, where a founder can have a golden share that enables the founder control significant proportion of decision-making power in order to ensure that when it comes to critical decision-making, like merger and acquisition, sales of the company, or change in the vision of the company generally, the founder still retains the power to determine whether that decision will pass through or not. So those are some examples of the structures that founders can employ to do that. As Inem, sorry, your name is, let me just stick to DK.
Inem. Inem.
As DK rightly mentioned earlier, it's not something most founders will consider at the early stage of building a company, because to be honest, at that point, what you're interested in is how do you even build this thing that doesn't exist, not about protecting what you haven't built. So the prioritization of the priority is different when you're building a company at the early stage versus when you build something that needs to be protected or that needs to be preserved. So I think those are some of the considerations that we need to put in place. Why it is very important to have that awareness that as the value gets baked over time, there is a need to start looking for structures to protect, to preserve that value. At the very early stage of building a company, I doubt any founder will be interested in how do I build a estate plan, to be honest, except of course, you're dealing with second time, fourth time, third time founders who have gone to battles and they've come back, they didn't die. So while building another war chest, they can figure out a way to incorporate that estate planning earlier on. So yeah, I think overall, as you get more investors, your interest in the company will be diluted naturally, but there are countless number of tools that can be used to protect your control while at the same time ensuring that decision making is not being taken against your wish, even if you're not there at that moment.
Thank you, Razak, for those insightful strategies, right? I believe, of course, you've rightly said it also depends on the value that will be added, right? Value proposition would actually determine the strategy that you would use. And you touched on the particular stage where you think would be right. I'm going to Kebaya now. So Kebaya, I've been thinking, at what critical stage do you think a techpreneur should actually begin serious estate planning? There are different growth stages for a business. When do you think should be the right time?
Thank you, Aboyami. There's a multi-tier that you can plan yourself against. If you're an early stage founder, you can focus, the early focus would be on founder agreements, simple wills. However, when there's a significant revenue event within the company or a significant round, funding round, there are tools that is when you now fully consider estate planning for you as a founder. So as an early stage founder, the best tool for that moment would be typical founder agreements or simple wills. When you begin fundraising and there's significant revenue owing to you as a founder, that is when you need to find legal tools of locking in your value within the company should you not exist anymore. Yeah. And if you move further on to late stage, IPO stage, you can employ legal services that lock in your shareholding in those companies that can be transferred to your next of kin. Thank you, Ayobami.
Thank you, Kebaya. Thank you for that insightful, comments. For me, I would say that, of course, as the business grows, you need to start thinking of how you would start, the estate planning. And when you start having investors in, there's also that exposure to putting out your information. I'm coming to you now, right? So, of course, one critical thing that, has been a concern globally, right, is data protection, right? And so there's a lot of privacy concerns around, estate planning, especially as a business. As you begin to grow, information is out there. You want to plan, investors, want you to actually ensure that they want to ensure that whatever they invest in, right, it's secured, right? And estate planning is also one of those things, and also as a business owner. So what are the privacy or data protection considerations, under the law globally, right? For IP rights, stock options, that you think founders should be aware of? Okay, you're muted in
Yeah.
case you're speaking.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, clearly.
Can you hear me? Okay, fantastic. So thank you very much. That question comes up quite a bit because on one hand, you're trying to protect your data, and while you're also trying to abide by the laws of within your nationality as well as globally on how to protect other people's data. If you're a data manager, you're somebody that manages other people's data by virtue of your product, by virtue of you being a vendor of services like that. So there's really of how you want to your own data, how do you preserve the data of your clients, your constituents, how do you obey the laws while you're exiting or while you're, there's succession migration, so to speak. I want to say one thing, consent is key, right? One to do is to make sure that whoever sees data that you are processing, acquiring, you must acquire their not hidden consent, intentional consent, informing them about what you want to do with their data. Make sure that that's the only thing you're doing with the data. Then second managers, we often, are concerned about meeting up with regulation, regulatory policies, right? But you're not thinking about yourself. If I have my data secured, my password encrypted, data that stored on the cloud, how do I ensure that even though I'm passing on my digital assets, quote unquote, via wills, which are the traditional ways of transferring wealth, how do I ensure while I am transferring that wealth through the wills, I'm giving consent for a specific person to use that information when I'm no longer do is to give clarity on the consent for my estate's manager to be able to access certain things, 1, 2, 3, 4, but I do not give consent for them to access my private email. My official emails, yes. The my digital vaults where I have my encryption codes, my safe codes, all that, I can give access upon certain factors being triggered. So for example, I can say you can access if there's a need for example, taxes or something, for example, you can access this need for a sale. If there's an approval from the board for mergers and acquisition, then you can have access to my encryption code, but it has to be clearly stated. I have to give consent in my will. So I can define who has access. I can define how they have access through the traditional means, right? Then there's also so for example, and now before I move on to the tech ways that we can actually do this, in the US, there's been a new law. It's not really new, but something that, when you have your inactive Google accounts, active emails, all those kind of things, and because they are inactive now, even prior to death or after death, before your heirs or your successors have access to it, normally Apple would say, no, we cannot give out, or you have followed their legacy form. In the legacy form, you can fill out information and say, look, in the event that goes in events I'm not available or you can't have access to me for some reason, I'm not please give access to my heirs, and you can specify that while you're alive. So no Meta or Apple or any of the big four will not give access to a third party without the state, without probate. But if you fill the legacy forms, you can actually give access. So it makes life a lot easier to be able to achieve that NDPA. It's also very specified there that you can include in your digital assets as a form of prior consent. So the holding company doesn't have a right to say, well, the action of this data is no longer alive, cannot give valid consent. As long as you have indicated it in your will or in your estate planning tools, whatever, then that is indicated as prior consent. So your wills, your legacy forms that you're filling while you're using those digital platforms, those also work. I mean, even on your phone, if you just check on your Apple phone right now, it'll ask you who your beneficiary is, who your next of kin is. You can stick in there so that if your phone is locked off because nobody else has your password, that particular person can reach out to Apple and say, look, if you verify on this particular phone, I'm the person that has the benefit. You just bring proof of identity, and then you'll be given access to that information. So it depends on your jurisdiction, right? In Nigeria, we don't really have, the NDPA has addressed data protection for you, how you manage the data of others, but there's no real law that specifically talks how you manage your own data when you have given consent for certain kind of yours to be used, but that's maybe your access to your information, but nothing up to the image of you. For example, it's an AI world now. So what happens to my image? Is my image still allowed to maybe while I was alive, I wasn't willing my image be used when I'm no longer alive? Or does consent have to be specific? Nigerian law really doesn't cover that now, especially in the Cybercrimes Act that has just been passed. It's not really clear. But we can still use the traditional means to be very specific. And I like what Mr. Razak Ahmed was referring to about how we can use the preferred shares, golden shares. Yes, all that is clear. Then you can also indicate that in the traditional means of estate planning, and then be specific about your interests, be specific about intent, and be specific about. So I think that that helps us to to ensure that there's a trust, there's a lack of trust deficit internationally. Somebody says, well, if I store my information with you and I no longer am alive, what would you do with my data? I think that using those traditional means and in combination with the digital vaults and the new technology that we have today can actually address those issues.
Thank you, Inem. Thank you, Inem. One thing I could get clearly from what your response is, consent, extremely important, right? And in digital age, consent is, very, 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 very key, especially as, for access to a lot of all the digital information, you need consent to access them. I would say also that one of the challenges that we faced recently in trying to plan for estate is the fact that most people focus on the tangibles and forget the intangibles, right? I'm coming to Tomi Balogun now, right? So there are quite a number of assets like startup, like equity, IP rights, stock options, and founder shares. For me, for example, right, I'm doing my estate planning. I'm thinking of my buildings, right? Cash, right? So I'm not even thinking of like the digital assets or investment. So what challenges arise in estate planning for assets such as the startup equity, IP rights, stock options and the likes?
Right. Okay. Can you hear me?
Clearly.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that question. Thank you for having me on the webinar today. And you're right, right? There are usually challenges with intangibles and sometimes tangibles as well. I've worked with a couple of founders, just working with them in terms of tidying up portfolio and connecting them to some trustees that I work with. So I'm quite familiar with some of those challenges. And while I will quickly speak about the challenges, but I also speak about some of the fundamental things that founders need to know as well. In terms of the challenges, I think one very simple one is just how to value, right, your shares. I mean, like Razak said, a lot of times when you're starting a startup the first time or you're starting a company the first time, you're not really thinking about, estate planning at that time. You just want to build a company that will grow and survive. So I'm talking about more seasoned founders or someone, a serial entrepreneur who's probably on their second company or just, have a family that is making them think differently. And sometimes major events also make people start thinking differently. And for instance, in financial industry, the death of a major founder or someone who is really respected was a jolting point for a lot of people to start thinking carefully about estate planning. So, but of course, it starts with how do I even value my equity? Right now, usually have valuation on paper, for instance. We all know that it's always a moving target, right? It's always a moving target based on who you're talking to. If you're speaking to an investor, they expect that, oh, I invested at a certain valuation, so that's the current value of the company. But then economic metrics might be different, and so many things might have changed. There might be some dilution that may have happened. So, there's so many things around valuation. So in terms of valuing shares, that's usually a challenge for a lot of founders, right? You find some of them having to, even consider secondary exits just to ensure they get some sort of cash back while they're still considering and, managing the uncertainty of valuation. So of course, it's usually clearer when you have it listed on a public exchange, but of course, we know that that's not what's the case for a lot of startups. So that's definitely a challenge. Now, in terms of how to overcome that challenge, honestly, it's tough. I think this is because in the liquidity issues, right? It's illiquid. A lot of times it's on paper. It's just something that is written on paper that I own this amount of shares in this company. So unless, like I said, you do a secondary exit or something, which is not even advisable as an investor, right? That was something that would raise a red flag for a lot of founders based on when and timing that you do it. So in terms of how to manage that challenge, a lot of times, a lot of them just put it the ballpark figure, right? Actually, because I look into portfolios a lot, and some of the portfolios see that, okay, this is my equity in my company, right? But since it's at a valuation that is on paper, right? It's not proven, it's not something that we can easily liquidate. It's kind of like circled, right? To say that, okay, we'll just assume this value or we'll continue to watch it, right? I mean, of course, assuming that you have other things in your portfolio, we'll continue to watch it to see, okay, as the valuation changes or what are your concerns around it. Because some of the reasons why it's something you have to circle as a moving target and not be very specific, because really, like I said, that we've seen valuations drop very fast, especially with economic uncertainty as well, is understanding that are there restrictions around this part, this equity that you own, right? So for instance, is there a transfer restriction, right? So can you transfer, some of the shares to a family member or something? So you may have, accepted some transfer restrictions on your shares, and that may make sure that you cannot, transfer to anybody. So nobody else can value that share or even own the share as, a shareholder that is part of your trust or is part of your family, right? So it depends on things such as transfer restrictions. Then, of course, vesting, stock options and vesting. If you're not a founder from scratch, for instance, or you may have stepped in at a certain time, are the shares fully vested, right? So it's not just saying I own this amount of shares or I will own this amount of shares in the future. Are they fully vested? Because in the unfortunate instance of death, invested options do usually lapse, right? They don't come to you upon death a lot of times because you have to meet certain milestones before shares can be vested, right? So of course, all of these things. And the last one I will speak about in terms of challenges is IP, especially if you're running a software as a service company or you have some sort of IP tied to your company. Do you own it as a founder or does the startup own it, right? Because if you own it as a founder, then it's a very different conversation. And I'm sure the lawyers here understand that context, right? Than if the startup owns it, right? So all of those things affect your ability to really maybe build a portfolio that is tidy, but that doesn't mean you don't get started, right? That doesn't mean you don't get started, depending on what stage you're at, right? And that also means you also consider diversification very carefully in your portfolio, right? I mean, to be honest, you can't say that you have a portfolio and 100% of your portfolio is 100% of your shares in your company. Now, of course, I'm not speaking to someone who's starting their first company. There's context here, but this is probably where financial literacy comes in, and you start thinking about, context. For instance, if you have a family, if you have other things you have to consider, how can I ensure that I can build a balanced portfolio in spite of all of these challenges?
Thank you, Tomi. Of course, I can see that Kibaya has his hands raised. I'm going to come to you shortly. Of course, we're trying to make this as interactive as possible. I have a follow-up question for Tomi. And, you talked about unvested stock. And yeah, rightfully, it's not been vested, right? So you do not have access to it or even rights to it. What about proprietary IP interest, right? And I'm asking this question looking at what would happen in the case where the founder, dies, right? What becomes of the propriety? I know you talked about the fact that it depends if it's owned by the company or if it's owned individually as a person, but maybe you should just give us insights into both scenarios, what you think should happen, what becomes of the proprietary interest, in those cases. Yeah.
Right. I mean, of course, like I said, legal lawyers will know really well about this, but I'll just speak to what, based on my experience. And what estate planning helps you do is basically document ownership, right? Who owns this IP? And a lot of times we always advise, even from working with trustees that I've worked with clients, is you set up a trust to an SPV to own IP, right? And so if you set up a trust that owns the IP, then you can license it to your startup. So of course, you can also have the startup own the IP, and that's a different conversation, right? If the startup owns the IP, then they would license it from you. You can there are different structures to this, right? So if the startup owns the IP and the startup is licensing the IP from you, then they can pay your trust for the ownership of that IP. So basically, estate planning just helps you document, ownership, and if you want to set up some sort of transfer rights, right? But it's always better when it's owned by a trust, right? Of course, set up in your name or by an SPV, right? With a trust, it's private, useful for holding, equity, IP, ownership, and all of that. And then with that, you can now license it to the startup, right? And then anytime any payment comes in, it goes directly to your trust. And even if in the unfortunate instance of death, it goes directly to your trust or to the SPV that is set up in your name, and that SPV can also be under a trust, right? So basically, that's what estate planning helps you do, to document ownership. Now, of course, with the advice of with legal counsel, right, you can decide how best you want the ownership or transfer rights to be documented for your estate plan.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tommy. I've taken notes, I've taken notes, and I think those are quite insightful. Kebaya, do you still have your question?
Actually, it's not a question, but an addition in the sense of intangible assets like digital assets and NFTs and all of that. It's a new dimension in technology and in wealth creation. So crypto offers a very unique opportunity in the sense that crypto has no central authority of which you can go claim an asset once the legal holder passes on. So it offers a unique challenge in estate planning. However, there's still new tools that are being developed currently that helps you as a tech founder know how to transfer your Bitcoins or your Ethereum once you pass on. People are exploring things like smart contracts that get triggered once your proof of death is confirmed. I believe Binance is working on an automated wealth transfer to a legacy nominated account, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Kebaya. Thanks for that comment, insightful comment. Thank you so much. So we've been talking about access to digital and online assets, right? So I'm coming to Mercy now. Tommy rightfully said, right? So even after death, right? So there has to be like plans in place. Inem also talked about consent, right? So who is a digital executor, right, in estate planning? I think this would be some sort of knowledge that the audience would want to know about, and what are their critical functions in probably managing that posthumous access to digital assets of the owners.
Thank you so much, Abayomi. And honestly, I'm just sitting down here and I'm learning. I'm just soaking up everything. And it's just lovely just to have those that have lived it, that are living it and going through the process to just teach us and create that much awareness for us. So a digital executor is what it says. I mean, it is what it says. It's a digital. So it's someone that operates within the digital space concerning your digital assets. So we've heard Inem talk about it. We've heard Tommy talk about it, and also Kabaya has also come in and spoken about it. So like we've already articulated, our digital footprints are increasing every day. You have IP rights, you have cloud-based streaming income. You have just about a whole lot of things that are no longer in the physical realm that we do or that we are used to. And as a result, that tilts you into, okay, how do I plan? If I'm incapacitated, how do I take care of my family? How do I transition, or what's the succession arrangement that I can put in place? And that's where the digital executor come in. And really, it's just to have someone who is savvy, who is knowledgeable, who understands that digital space. I remember in the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioner, this has always been a very major issue. And it was almost like, okay, maybe we have to get into the mind of a computer, right? We need to know how computer works. And anytime people say that, I'm like, okay, it's so hilarious. Do I have to know how a computer works before I'm able to protect my asset? Is that intrinsic to what you want to do? So a digital executor would help you to understand, take an inventory of your assets, especially the asset class that are no longer in the tangible space. They are intangibles and all that. So you take an inventory of it, and that person would help you take the inventory and help you start triggering things, considerations that you should be mindful about. So would it be setting up your legacy your legacy vault? Is it if you have an Instagram account, for example, that you use for business purposes, if you have an email account and all that, what are the legacy provisions that comes into play? And just as Kabaya said, if you own Bitcoin or you own, what are the, within the structure that you own those assets, what's the legacy provision that is in place? So that person helps you and fully focused on just helping you to articulate and arrange your digital asset in a coherent state, and now start telling you what you need to do, how you need to protect yourself. So we've heard Razak talk about the nuances that can be there. So that same person would be able to say, okay, these are the nuances, these are the things you should be concerned about. And if this is the spectrum of what your assets are, just like Tommy said, what structures are you using to hold it? Can you go back to the renegotiating table and say, okay, you know what, this is what I think would be best for me, and could we look at it this way, and all that. So it's creating that awareness. Is that person that understands the digital space, understand the digital assets, and is able to help you take an inventory of it, and also help you plan your assets, such that if anything happens to you, whether in the case of incapacitation, whether in the case of death, or whether in the case of any other thing, those that you want to have your assets are most likely to have those assets or benefit from those assets. And those assets don't disappear. They don't just leave the face of the earth. And you are also able to control what happens to you, to your digital footprints when you are no longer here, which is very important. I think Inem talked about image. You are no longer here. Who has the right to your image? What have you signed out? What can you not sign out? And all that. How can your estate benefit from image rights that are attached to you? So those things look like they were not things we were discussing about 10 years, 15, 20 years ago, but they are things that are so intrinsic in our day-to-day lives right now, because practically with AI and everything, we are all living basically in the digital space right now. So that's what the digital executor helps you to do.
Thank you, Mercy. Thank you so much for that response. Quite insightful. We've been talking about access, and I'm still with you, Mercy, right? Talking about now I'm looking about like the password management and access to some of the information for those that invest in digital assets or investments. And I'm going to share more like a practical example. I had a client like at Pennytree. Pennytree is a digital bank, right? So we actually lose her, and then she had quite a number of investments with Pennytree, and and it was a business, right? And luckily, for some reason, I think she shared her password with her husband, so which meant that her husband could have access to the account and continue the business. So, and we were thinking, what if the husband did not have access to the password? What would happen, right? So that actually it led us to creating like legacy contracts for clients that are trying to sign up just in case something happens, right? It's different with traditional banks where you have like you could list like your beneficiaries and all of that. They come into the bank with all of the documents. But with digital banking and a digital age, it's a bit different, right? So my question to you, Mercy, is how can these password managers, digital vaults, and how can they be integrated into estate plans?
Yeah, fantastic. So a digital vault really is, they have a deposit box in the bank, and you have these lofty ideas. Oh my God, so that's where you keep they'll tell you they keep important documents there. They keep some of them keep, I've managed clients that keep their gold in those deposit box. So the digital vault is actually your deposit box, if you were used to that, right? Now but the digital vault operates within the digital space, and what it does is designed to store critical documents, data, and information for you. It is a secure environment for your digital assets, and it serves as a single point of reference for you. So whenever you whenever you have sensitive information as regards whether your personal life or your business life, it's always good that you are intentional about, you know, that same deposit box that you keep at the bank for some key things. You have to start thinking about having that digital vault for very, very important, sensitive information that applies to you within the digital space. We all know the password manager, right? So it's always, you have these apps on our phones that helps us to arrange the password so that you can so you don't have to keep racking your head every time you need to use an app, or you need to get into the mailbox or everything. So your password manager comes in and you have a prompt, and you are already using the app. So for estate planners within the digital space, your digital vault and your password manager, they are very, very important. And just as you said, so the client passed and her husband had access to it. What would have been best would have been if there was a will, if there was even a simple will that she had already documented all her digital footprints, all the digital assets that she had, and who would be able to have access to it, or who she would be kind enough to say, you know what, if I'm no longer here, please go ahead and manage it for the interest of A, B, C, D. So in estate planning, you have to now start thinking about how do you keep your very key personal and sensitive and also business information, how you keep them and how you are able to secure them, so that when you're no longer here, or in the case of incapacitation, it is easy for those that you have appointed or those that you've nominated to be able to continue for the, earn those revenues, continue to manage those accounts, especially if you have people that are dependent on you and you want them to be able to take the benefit of those assets. So when you are integrating your digital vault and your password and everything, you have to integrate them into your estate plan. And the first thing you want to do is look at what I've just spoken earlier, the digital executor. Have someone that truly does understand this whole ecosystem that we are living in, and is able to help you articulate them and document them, create an inventory. Then once you've created that inventory, you can now be looking at, okay, so what's the legal structure that I will use to own it? You could also have access protocols. I think it was Inem that was talking about it earlier, from the digital protection space, or the privacy protection space. You have to have access protocols. What are the triggers? You understand that, okay, when these triggers happen, this person would be able to do A or do B, and life can continue as best as you want it. Then you could also have multi-layered security that would also be embedded within it. So really, when you're planning for your digital asset now, is a whole new total ecosystem that you are dealing with. But it's very critical that the ones that the advisor that you are working with understands this space, appreciates it, and is readily available with the tools to help you navigate this. So really, you have to look for a way to integrate what is available. Then you now have the hard copy documentation, or like Tommy said, your estate plan just helps you to document your ownership or document your asset, but you do it from an intentional and a knowledge base. So you don't just do it haphazard, and that's where the digital executor comes in with all the nuances about the access protocols, the multi-layer security that you could put in, the structures you could use to hold it, and and the rights that you give to others, to third parties, especially where you are no longer here.
Thank you, Mercy. Extremely important concerns. You've also emphasized that access protocols, so having that digital pause digital bank, digital wallet, basically that guides how your information is being put out there to the beneficiaries. So I would
Yeah,
like to say also,
and yeah,
okay,
and
go on.
Abayomi, yeah. So this is very important, right? I'm so sorry. I needed to mention this. This is very important, right? You need, I mean, our digital footprints are not just there for, I mean, we shouldn't take it with, oh, I mean, be negligent about it or not think that they are significant and all that. Because really, at the end of the day, some of these digital assets have either sentimental value to you or they have financial value to you. So when you are intentional about it, what one of the key things is that the revenues or the financial benefits comes back to you or those that you want to benefit from them. Then you also have the risk of hacking. You also have the risk of theft, unauthorized assets. I mean, bad players coming in and just doing all kinds of stuff. So it's not just really about is this a good to have, but it's something that you must think about and know really that if I'm operating within the digital space, I have IPs, I have revenue streams that come from the maybe my TikTok or my YouTube or whatever. I have to start thinking about what are the legacy provisions or what are the legacy structures that I can put in place, because anybody, absolutely anybody, it can be stolen. It can be stolen. So who can make a claim to say, sorry, this is a case of theft and all that. So really it's super important. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mercy. This is extremely important because we have a lot of digital creators out there, YouTubers, and they make a lot of money through all of these platforms. And most of them, they're just on their own. They're individuals that don't have all of these plans in place, and it's extremely important they have plans in place for those that will be actually their beneficiaries and all of that. So, thank you, Mercy. So, I would just like to say, if you have questions, please drop your questions in the chat box. We would attend to them after the conversation. So there's a question already in the chat box, but just to let you know that we're seeing them and then we'll attend to it subsequently. Just drop your messages, we'll pick them up. So we've been talking about founders, right? Business owners. It's just, Tommy, I'm coming to you now because it's also important that we look at it from the investor's standpoint, flipping it a little bit, right? So as an angel investor, I'm investing in a business, right? I'm investing in a company, in a startup. How do I, how do I basically accommodate in terms of like for my estate plan, accommodate for future liquidity events, right? Such as, exit strategies, mergers, buyouts, things that I would basically benefit from in the future, right? How can an angel investor plan to accommodate all of those, all of those?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mean, just share a story just to show you how important it is. One of the founders that I know was telling me about a lady that, was one of his first investors when he started his company, right? She was one of his first angel investors. She believed in the company and invested in the company. And at the time, he was doing a raise where the value of that her very first investment was now about $300,000, right? But he could not find her, right? He had done everything, in fact, hired investigators, find her, know anything. He just cannot find her. So at the time, she was living in Nigeria. And then I think she left, but he's just not been able to find her. And it's just something that really bothers him because she believed in his company and invested in his company, right? So as an angel investor, one of the ways that you should consider, avoiding that kind of situation is setting up a trust, right? And I will say this in context because I've kind of like worked with one or two founders and I work with trustees as well. It's not a very easy process, right? And I think that's one thing that, I hope that will be either there's some innovation around it, or maybe even the digital trust process can help as well, because it's just not very straightforward when you're trying to get someone to set up a trust. It's still quite archaic, in my opinion, right? But yeah, one of the things that you probably need to consider is, setting up a private trust. Now, for instance, when I syndicated the fund, when we did the fund of funds is the syndication to invest in the VC fund, 2, 3 years, 4 years into that investment, we're getting questions, right? Some of the investors are saying that, oh, I'm no more in Nigeria, I've relocated, I'm somewhere else in the world, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. How will my family know that I have this investment? When there's a distribution event or when there's some sort of liquidity or exit, what's going to happen? And we said, you know what? Then you need to come work with the trustee that we work with, because as a syndicate, we worked with a trustee, right? So it's a trustee-led syndicate. So the syndicate is registered with the trustee. And when the VC fund has any exit or distribution, it is distributed directly to the trustee, right? Now, this is me as a company saying that I'm also taking steps to ensure that anything that has to do with, the risk of my company or me does not, affect the other investors in the VC syndicate. So we set up a trustee-led syndicate, right? And so while we work with the team from Public Trust and to ensure that the VC fund pays the syndicate through the trustee, we also encourage every member of the syndicate to set up private trusts. So because of our relationship with that particular trustee, they were able to work with all the members of the syndicate in the trust, right? And with that process, some of them also brought in other investments that they had in different places, right? But that just shows you an example of what is possible if you're thinking long-term, right? So we have, some investors have still not. And, I think early this year we had a liquidity event and people started to ask questions. Oh, I'm like, but we told you to set up a private trust, right? And this is what happens when you don't, because now you're running helter-skelter to say, how do I sort this out? How do I sort that out? And VC is long-term, right? Investing in a startup is even longer term, right? Sometimes you might have to wait longer, right, before there's an exit, right? So with VCs, that's what, give you an example of what we've done, basically ensuring that we work with trustees. So that's also an example of what you can do as an angel investor. Reach out to trustees that ask questions, or a legal counsel can help you also connect you to a trustee to ensure that you have your portfolio, if you want to bring your entire portfolio into the hands of a trustee. And different trustee companies have different products and different services, right? I don't think you have to be, well, you do have to have a minimum. Let's be real. Some trustees have minimum in terms of minimum portfolio size you need to have, especially in terms of cash and liquidity, right? But of course, because of our relationship with the trustee, we were able to bring in the members of the syndicate, even though some of them did not meet the minimum, right? Based on my interaction with a couple of trustees in Nigeria, I think the minimum typically is ballpark about 500 million naira. That's what I've seen, which, right, I think they are just thinking about it in foreign currency terms. But for some people, if they don't have assets that are valued at that, it might be a challenge, right? So that's an opportunity for innovation, actually. But just to show that definitely trust is the way to go, right? And SPV also works, right? Which is what we did. We syndicated an SPV, but I'm saying that we still had to bring that SPV, a syndicate, under the trustee, right? So to a large extent, that's my experience in ensuring that you can protect yourself as an angel investor, because this is something that you have to think about beyond yourself. You have to think about your family, your beneficiaries. I think that's a term that is used in trustee services, your beneficiaries, right? And, just engaging trust services will make you begin to ask yourself some questions or become aware of some things you have to ask yourself. For instance, who do you appoint as the executor of your trust? Do you want a revocable trust and a irrevocable trust? All of those questions come in. What kind of assets are you bringing under a trust? Do you want to own assets in your name, or do you want to own assets in the name of a company or in the name of the trust? All of those things just make you think differently about how you build a portfolio going forward, or how you think about ensuring that you leave a legacy for your family. And of course,
thank you, Tomi.
Right, but I'm sure your trustee will help all of that.
A quick follow-up question, right? You maybe just have to be very straightforward. Like, so do you think putting in that trust as an element, as part of, like, for the investors, should be voluntary, or should it be like, what, if you want to invest in us, we advise you should do this, as part of, helping them secure their future investments? Or should it, I know there are no regulations that make it compulsory, right? So what's your take on that?
So can you take that again? I didn't really hear what you said.
So putting in that trustee element for investors, right? So it's usually voluntary. You could decide you want to actually ensure that you set up a trust to cover your investment. Do you think it should be more like as part of the investment requirements. You want to invest with us, we actually do want you to set up this trust. Or should it be, what we advise you to do this, what's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I agree that it should. I mean, we had already set up the syndicate and already done the investments before we now step back and said, you know what, guys, we need to bring in a trustee, right? So yeah, I mean, going forward for me, any syndicate I'm leading definitely has to be, actually because it was a long-term investment. I do a lot of other short-term syndicates, right? But this was long-term, and we had to step back and say, you know what, we have to bring a trustee into this arrangement. So you're right. I think that would be a great way to even create or structure the syndicate from the beginning.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you for that. So I don't know if Kabaya is still on the call.
So Kabaya has noted, I don't know if he's still on the call. Kabaya, if you are here, that would be good. But he had noted he had to join another meeting. But I don't know if he's still here. If he's not responding, then probably he has had to step out.
Okay. That works. He actually did send me a message too as well. So I think I'll be going back to Razak now. So we've been talking about setting up estate planning, right? And in setting that up, it's important that there is consideration for a risk and governance strategy, right? So what critical stage in a startup life do you think estate planning should be formally integrated into a founder's risk and governance strategy?
Oh yeah, thank you, Abayomi. So I'm not sure there is a one cap fit all answer to that, but I think it can be looked at from the angle of wealth preservation and, more importantly, intergenerational transfer of wealth. So yeah, if for example, if you're a first-time founder, while it is important that estate planning comes into the picture early on, I think for most people, in terms of the investment of effort, investment of time, it will be more into how do I even build this company up first before we start talking about the preservation of that value. But again, it could be different for a case where a company is being built and it's not technically a startup, maybe being built by an experienced operator or an experienced investor, where initially the startup initial capital is materially higher. At that point, the risk is material, so you might want to start thinking about planning the estate very, very early on. And I need to make this difference because if I'm starting a business now without any external capital, at best, what matters to me is how do I acquire customers? How do I build the products? How do I provide excellent service? To be able to the level where I can test that the value I'm putting to the market is something that the customers will value and the market will value before we now come to what is the value of what I'm actually building. But overall, as companies starts getting into getting external capital, I think that's where reality sets in, because at that point, you're not the only one building the business. You're not the only one with a skin in the game. There are other third parties. And legal document agreement starts flying around, because when it comes to business relationships like that, you just never can tell the kind of behavior people will exhibit when the food get cooked, right? So things need to be tied down legally. Agreement needs to be signed properly. And at that point, you need to start considering how to protect your own side of the value. And that's where estate planning comes in. And that is also quite important because you just never can tell what will happen down the line as you get external investors in, as you get small stakeholders into the business. You just never can tell what will happen to you. And there are two important things here that I think we need to look at. One is, first, some entrepreneurs actually build businesses because they're extremely passionate about it, right? Not that they don't like the value that comes from it, but they're just extremely passionate about it. For example, someone who is doing cancer research, trying to solve cancer problem in the world. I'm sure that kind of person, entrepreneur, will be more interested in making sure that the cancer vaccine comes to life than the initial money that comes out of it. Well, I'm speaking majority now, right? So there is a way the estate planning can be done such that the vision of the company will still be maintained and the vision of the company will not be destroyed even when the original founder is no longer around. So in order to protect the vision, it could be for a cause. It could be to solve some important problem in the world. It could be climate related. It could be economic upliftment. It could be economic empowerment. It could be anything. It could be, gender-based stuff. So in order to maintain and protect the vision that the founder has, it is important to put all of those in estate planning such that even when the founder is no longer there, the legacy of the founder is protected, right? So that's from vision, passion standpoints. And for you to do that, it's very important that that starts very early, especially when you start having external parties join the ship of building the business. Then the second part is the economic interest, of course, that you have in the business that you're building, whether it is for important cause or it's just for profit base, right? And that is important because even when you leave, you want to ensure that whatever economic value you've created as a result of building the business is passed down to the right people you want the money to be passed to. It could be your children, it could be your family, it could be a foundation, it could just be, some important cause that matters to you while you're alive. And so estate planning can help you do that as well. So overall, the stage where this matters is very contextual. It depends on it depends on what kind of business is being built from day one. And then second, one that cuts across all type of businesses is when you start having external parties join the journey of building the business. It is very important that things are well documented. And as things get documented, in order to protect what you're trying to build, it's important that you put that in estate trust, in estate planning or trust. But let me put this across, something which Tommy mentioned earlier. These things are very easy to say as I'm saying them. They are actually very difficult to implement, to be honest, very, very difficult to implement. There are so many moving parts, so many manual processes that we have to go through to get them done, such that those things alone can be discouraging when it comes to implementing them. So I think, yeah, what Mercy and the team, what you guys are doing, I think is an important step in, calling people's attention to that space, which is something that everybody should be part of when it comes to wealth preservation. And as the conversation gets more pronounced, more emphasized, I'm sure there will be a significant innovation in that space as well. Mercy is already doing something amazing. We hope that you will continue to innovate in this space to make it something that every founder or every entrepreneur or every CEO, every wealth owner will be willing to do, in as much as it is so easy to do. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Razak. You made vital points there, and the last one extremely important. To be honest, as a founder or business owner, there's just so much to do with, right? So, but then events like this would help, bring the enlightenment in terms of wealth preservation, and all the things that we need to do, both from a founder standpoint and also from the investor standpoint. That's extremely key too as well. We are moving on well. And so before we take questions from the audience, I would like to invite our speakers to more like share their final thoughts on those key takeaways that you want everyone to leave here with. I'll start with Mercy. You're muted. Okay.
Unmute. Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, the key takeaways that we should have from here is we no longer exist to a very large extent within the physical space. There's a lot of assets that are being created. There's a lot of innovation that is going in, that are being monetized, that are income streams within the digital space. So it's very important for us to appreciate that and start thinking about how we can preserve our assets. Not only preserve our assets, preserve those that we love, preserve our families, and also preserve our legacy. We don't want a case where someone will point to you, or there will be an article in maybe Tech Cabal or in any of these tech platforms, and they are just lauding all the things that you've created, but honestly, when there's incapacitation or there is death or any other issue, the whole estate is in disarray. So really being intentional about it, as you grow, as you start, even understanding that you could own assets in structures, and just knowing that you could even, the licensing opportunities that you could take advantage of from that initial stage. How do you bring it into the conversations, even if you're going to have external investors coming? So this is what we should keep in mind. So as we keep on playing, as we keep interacting within the digital space, it might have sentimental value, but to a very large extent, there is economic value and monetary value, financial value that comes from it. How do we ensure that that is preserved for ourselves, for those that we love, for our families, and also for our legacy when we are no longer here?
Thank you, Mercy. Thank you, Mercy. Inem, final thoughts?
So I don't know if you can see me or hear me. Okay,
Yes.
so I would like to say that I hope a lot of people have benefited from today's conversation, because it has been very strategic. I have also been on the learning curve here on a lot of things that have been said. So thank you very much to Mercy and the host for hosting this. I think that the one thing I would like people to take away would be the concept of rest. Rest is not only doesn't happen after death. Rest can happen in life, right? So the moment your affairs are in order, and then all you have to do is just to keep building on what you have already put in place as a structure. And once you do it once, most likely all you have to do is just feed in more data into that structure and then expand it as it goes. So the entry points may be a bit, shaky at the beginning. For you to get the rest while you're still alive, you're not worried about division within your family in terms of people having arguments. Oh, daddy wanted this, mommy wanted that, and then there's some sort of friction when you already had a happy home while you were alive, and then you die and that happy home becomes fractured, right? Or your happy home becomes broke and they are watching other people carry out your enjoy the benefits of what you had worked so hard for. And this especially, I want to say this especially for lawyers. Lawyers really, and I'm a lawyer, so I can say a lot of lawyers really don't think about retirement. They also really don't think about estate planning, and lawyers within the tech space. So we are seeing other people function and push themselves. But lawyers are really not thinking, this law firm that I'm creating to work in the tech space, when I'm no longer alive, what happens then? So give yourself the gift of grace, give yourself the gift of rest. Thank you very much for bringing me on this wonderful platform. It's been exciting to be here. I'm available to answer questions for the rest of the time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Inem. Thank you. Rest, extremely important, right? So over to you, Tomi, your final thoughts.
Hi, so thank you so much for having me. We definitely learned a lot from all the speakers as well. I would say that financial literacy is very important. A lot of times, entrepreneurs do not focus on financial literacy. Now, financial literacy is beyond saving, budgeting, investing. Estate planning is also a segment, or it's part of financial literacy. Understanding that all of the things you work so hard to build, to ensure in terms of security for yourself and your family, shouldn't be something that should be left to chance, right? So I think that we should all embrace financial literacy, especially in terms of estate planning. So well done to the company for setting this up. And I also believe that it's not too late. It's never too late to start early, even if it's to start with, seeking information, right? Even if you think that, oh, I don't want to get into that now, I want to focus on building my business. I don't think that you should exclude yourself from access to information or being in the right networks, or signing up for webinars. Yeah, well done, to learn as much as you can about how to safeguard and basically ensure that your estate and everything that you worked hard to build is protected, right? So yeah, I think financial literacy is very critical. Work with the right people, seek legal counsel, seek professionals, ensure that you tidy up your portfolio, right? And do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. You made very, very vital points there. You know, as a finance professional, I've advised clients on their planning, forecasting, you know, budgeting. But then we never talk about estate planning, but then this is one critical side of planning. What happens after you leave, right? What you should definitely plan for that. Thank you, Tommy. So over to you now, Razak. Final thoughts.
Oh yeah. I think I should just summarize what everyone has said. But I'll add a kicker to it, which is that conversations like this are important. They are the early stages of innovation around spaces like this. And this is me challenging you lawyers, right? Inem said even lawyers don't have estate planning being done. And this is me challenging you lawyers that beyond doing it, I think there is a need for this space to be made a lot accessible for a lot of people, right? Conversations like this can elevate the level of awareness that people have about it. But more important is the action, like how will people have access to product and services like this? Probably there's an entrepreneur out there somewhere who is building something that can make it super, super easy. I know how difficult it can be, especially when it comes to legal side of things. But this is me challenging you lawyers to make life a lot easier for us so we can have access to product like this with a click of a button. As some of the speakers said during the session, our digital footprint is increasing, and it will continue to compound over the next couple of years or into the future. And the way value and assets get preserved and get transferred intergenerationally will be completely different from the way those things were done years back. So we need to first understand the world that we are in, and how do we play in that world such that we still create that value protection while speaking the language of today's world. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for putting this together.
Thank you, Razak. Thank you. It's a pleasure having you here. So we would now go to the question and answer session. We have a very short time to do that. So if you have any questions, you can use the chat box, or you can just the hand raise icon, and then we'll call you to speak. So we have a question here from Sophie. So Sophie is from Kenya. So a question is, with the rising cyber security cases, would you recommend insuring a vault? And then she's like, are there insurance companies that do that? So I think I would like Inem to respond to this, because I know she talked about, like, you know, data privacy and all of that. So
Hi. Okay, so that's a fantastic question. Yes, you can insure your vault. There are insurance companies that depends on your country, your location. I'm not personally aware of an insurance company that does that in Nigeria. So maybe if you're a bit specific about your country, then we can look into that. But yes, it's advisable to insure your vault. And then also to get legal advice on the valuation of the insurance that you're going to, because most of the time people do, okay, you know what, my actual value of what is, let's say $50 million. But for insurance purposes, you know what, let's just insure it to $1 million because I can't keep paying my high premium rate all the time, because it's the value of what you're insuring that determines your rate, right? So that's also, you need to get proper. If push comes to shove, or family, your hair is running into trouble, how do they mitigate that? Another thing, that the question that wasn't directly asked, but you may benefit from that, is when your vault cuts across different jurisdictions, right? When it is you have assets, digital assets, are generating remuneration from one aspect, from one jurisdiction, as controlled by the data protection regulation in that connection, in that area, and then you have another asset that is, for example, domiciled in the US and has to obey the HIPAA laws or California data protection laws. Your insurance level or your insurance premium has to apply to this specific thing. So that would be something that I would like you to avert your mind to. So get a lawyer, get somebody who is a trust expert, advise us to just insure the vault, and then you may end up not getting value that is pari passu with what it is that you were actually aiming for. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Inem. I'm sure you answered Sophie's question well enough so, but then there's another question here from Faisal. So Faisal is from Mauritius. So his question is, have you seen any traction from HNWI or family offices into the Mauritius jurisdiction from the African continent? Mercy, maybe you could give us, you could help with this.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We do see a lot of traction. I can tell you that to a lot of founders within the African continent, especially when in their holdco structure, you find out that most of the holdcos are set up or structured from Mauritius. So even if that's for the African continent, then if they're looking at North America or they're looking at Latin America or they're looking at other jurisdictions, they probably have other structures. But for most founders, most entrepreneurs, so if they're operating out of East Africa, West Africa, and all that, because of there are some benefits that Mauritius as a jurisdiction provides. And all that that has to do with exchange benefits. So you don't have exchange controls, you don't have reduced tax and all that, and also the ability for, if you're going to be taking assets from investors and they want to move the assets into the continent, more often than not, they will have to move it into an holdco structure, and most of those structures are either Mauritius or so they use Mauritius for that, right? So we have that. So Mauritius is not a jurisdiction that is not known. It is a jurisdiction that is known. But what we always advise founders, or what we always advise those, is to ensure that you get your proper structures. And you also need to ensure that you stay on top of whatever the legal space is, because things change. Mauritius recently changed a bit of their residency rules and all that. So if you are not cognizant of these things, or you don't have an advisor that is sitting on top of it for you, or telling you what the intricacies are, you don't want to have something come up that you were never really ready for, or you didn't plan for. Then also with respect to data protection as well, and also exchange of information from different countries as regards your taxable gains and all that thing. So really, why Mauritius is useful, it serves its purposes. You have to make sure that you are not doing it blindly, and that whoever it is that is helping you with the structure keeps you in the loop and keeps you on top of all the things that you need to know. Yeah.
Thank you, Mercy. I think there's a follow-up question from Faisal. He's talking about like asset class, right? So what is the penetration of AI in terms of asset class? I see very low interest. Some have tried and have lost money from USD and USDT. So basically what I can understand from his question is, there are different asset classes, and then in terms of like investing in AI, I'm sure. And then of course, there's a lot of risk involved in cryptos, AI investments. And of course, I believe that one of the things that usually most investment advisors do from the onset is understanding the risk appetite of whoever is investing, and then using that to determine how to structure the specific investment. I think I would want maybe Razak to give more insights into this in terms of asset class for cryptos, and how you think you would advise clients on investing in USD or USDT.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think overall, my starting point would be that asset classes are evolving, and the whole concept of traditional asset class as being split into the regular equities, fixed income, and alternative assets. That universe is expanding, and there have been documented research work by global fund managers and institutional bodies classifying crypto as an asset class. But of course, an asset class is a different type of features and characteristics. And that needs to be put into consideration when you are allocating capital into that specific asset class, because relatively volatile. The full understanding of it is not there yet compared to what we have for the likes of equities and fixed income. But the advice is that you should have like a small allocation of your capital into that asset class. And the logic is very simple, right? Diversification, which is one. Then the second is that if your allocation to risk is small, and if by some magic the upside is achieved, you are likely to benefit a whole lot from it. But if something terrible happens and the whole asset class disappears, then you are not as largely exposed to it as it will be if you had increased your allocation. So yeah, there is an increasing agreement globally among investment professionals that crypto is now like an asset class on its own, but that the characteristics of that asset class need to be well understood and the role it plays in asset allocation generally. So overall, yeah, you can look at it as an asset class, but allocate a small portion to it and not just everything. The traditional asset classes are still significant engine of wealth creation globally.
Thank you, Razak. Of course, I'm sure that this conversation is a continuous one, right? And I'm sure I'm seeing quite a number of questions, but because of time, we might not be able to take all of the questions. What I'm going to say is that you can continue to engage us, at www.fiduciaryserviceslimited.ltd.com, or email us at contact@fiduciaryservicesltd.limited.com. So I would say that it's been a very, very, engaging and insightful conversation, right? And we've been able to explore practical ways, tech founders can safeguard their legacy, manage digital assets, and effectively navigate the legal and tax issues that come with estate and succession planning. So it's been, for me personally, it's been also very insightful. I've learned quite a number of things. And I'm sure it's the same for all of the speakers and also the participants, those that came into join. We really appreciate your time in being a part of this. I think at this point, I would like to invite the hosts to give a vote of thanks. Merci.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Abayomi. Abayomi, it's been really fantastic having you moderate this session and just bring everything together and just kind of make sense of what the conversations have been. So really, 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 really appreciate you. Thank you so much. And a huge thank you to everyone that made our time. I know how busy these are CEOs. I know how busy, and they need their time. They are very nimble, agile, and every other thing with respect to what they are doing part-time and all that. So a huge thank you for myself and all the team to Razak Ahmed. Thank you so much. Well done for the fantastic work you and your team are doing at Cowrywise. The same too with Tommy. Tommy, absolutely fantastic having you. I know how busy your schedule can be, but you've made that time today. Well done, and just keep doing the great work that you are doing. We really, really appreciate you, and we really, 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 really are learning a lot from you. And Inem, thank you so much. Inem is actually in Enugu, so if we had a bit of glitch with Inem's reception and all that, it's because she dialed in from Enugu, where we are having the Nigerian Bar Association conference and all that, and she plays a very, very strategic role. She's an executive within the executive committee of the NBA, but Inem still made that time for us, and she was so much lively and every other thing. So Inem, we are absolutely grateful to you. We thank you for the commitment, for the time and the interest. Thank you so much. And for everyone that has joined this website, clarifications around how when you are going through your techpreneur journey, or how, as you operate within the digital space, you are being intentional about what happens afterwards, whether it's a case of incapacitation, whether it's a case of death, or whether it's a case of any unforeseen issues, or that might actually impact those that you love, how you would go about it. For us as private client professionals, we remain committed to helping founders, their families, their businesses and investors to protect their legacy. That's all we are about. We are all about preserving you, your family, and your legacy. That's what we do 24/7, round the clock. So please do reach out to us. If you have clarifications you want to make, please do so. A lot of what we do is going to be impacted, especially if you are operating in Nigeria, by the new tax act. So you want to reach out to us. You want to also look out for our newsletters, look out for our blog posts, so that you can actually stay in the know how digital assets are classified right now. So we're talking about cryptocurrencies, we're talking about digital wallets and every other thing. I mean, there's a new classification. They are taxable, they are chargeable to tax, gains are chargeable, and all that on those assets are now chargeable. So we want to make sure that we keep in the loop and we always kind of engage. We are available. Contact at fiduciaryservicesltd.com. So whether you are structuring your new startup equity, whether you want to use a trust, whether you want to safeguard the assets with a digital executor, whether you are planning for succession across borders, whatever it is that you are doing, we are available to help you, guide you with practical solutions that would align long-term for you, also with your values and whatever goals that you are. So we are available, we are here to help you. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to having you join us next year when we have Wealth Webinar 7.0. So do enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you once again.
Thank you, Mercy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, Razak. Thank you, Inem. Yeah, thank you.